thumb, 1956, the city that burns forever in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. There once stood a thriving mining town called Centralia. In the mid-20th century, it was a place where families lived, worked, and raised their children. But beneath this seemingly peaceful community, an invisible disaster was brewing, a disaster that would turn Centralia into one of the most notorious ghost towns in America. It all started in 1962 when an underground fire ignited in one of the town's coal mines. But this wasn't an ordinary fire. It was a fire that would burn not for days or weeks, but for decades. How did it begin? What caused the fire to start in a mine that had long since been abandoned? The answers lie in a series of unfortunate events that culminated in one of the most destructive fires in American history. The fire was initially started when a routine attempt to clean up a local landfill led to an unintended ignition. The landfill, used for the town's waste disposal, was located near the old mine tunnels. The workers inadvertently set the coal veins beneath the town alight while attempting to burn away refuse in the landfill. It might sound like a simple mistake, but what followed would prove far more complex and devastating than anyone could have imagined. In the beginning, no one really understood the scale of the problem. Centralia's residents went about their daily lives, unaware that the ground beneath them was slowly turning into an inferno. The local authorities knew that there was a potential danger, but they didn't fully grasp the severity of the situation. Despite occasional reports of smoke from the cracks in the ground and strange, unusual smells, the community was reluctant to believe that a fire was spreading underground, relentlessly consuming the coal seams. As the days and weeks passed, the fire grew quietly, spreading through the intricate network of abandoned tunnels beneath the town. By the time the full scale of the disaster was realized, it was already too late. What should have been a simple incident turned into an uncontrollable blaze that was consuming the heart of Centralia itself. The mine fire burned through miles of coal, and with every passing year, it grew stronger and harder to contain. The town's infrastructure began to suffer. Cracks appeared in the streets, releasing dangerous levels of carbon monoxide into the air. People reported feeling lightheaded and dizzy. The underground fire was quietly claiming more than just the coal reserves beneath the surface. It was slowly poisoning the air, making the town increasingly uninhabitable. Residents were starting to feel the heat, both literally and figuratively. The temperatures of the ground rose steadily, creating hazardous conditions that were ignored for too long. But it wasn't just the fire beneath the town that made Centralia an eerie and tragic case. It was the delayed response. Local officials failed to recognize the full scope of the fire's potential. Early on, there was a general reluctance to act, despite growing evidence of the disaster unfolding. By the time the state and federal governments stepped in, the fire had spread far beyond their control, forcing a mass evacuation and leaving a ghost town in its wake. What went wrong? How could something so destructive and irreversible have been allowed to continue unchecked for so long? Centralia's story isn't just about a fire. It's about a town that became a victim of a slow-burning disaster, where human error, negligence, and a lack of proper foresight allowed a small problem to escalate into a crisis that would devastate an entire community. Now, decades later, the fire still burns beneath the ground, and the town remains a haunting reminder of what happens when things go terribly wrong, and the consequences are ignored for too long. If you're intrigued by how a simple mistake could lead to such a monumental disaster, leave a comment below. What do you think could have been done differently to prevent Centralia from becoming the ghost town it is today? In the quiet town of Centralia, nestled in the coal-rich hills of Pennsylvania, no one suspected that the earth beneath their feet would soon become a hellish inferno. The fire that would devastate the town began in 1962, not with a dramatic explosion or a sudden catastrophe, but with something much more insidious, a simple and seemingly harmless fire set to burn away trash. Yet, this was no ordinary blaze. The landfill, where Centralia's waste was disposed of, was situated near an abandoned coal mine. The town's officials, facing the challenge of cleaning up the landfill, decided to set fire to the garbage to get rid of it. It seemed like a practical solution at the time, as burning trash was a common way to dispose of waste. Little did they know, the fire would ignite something far more dangerous, an underground fire that would rage uncontrollably for decades. The coal veins beneath Centralia had been there for centuries, and they were far from inactive. Once the fire was set in the landfill, it slowly began to spread into the nearby coal seams. The coal beneath the ground is highly flammable, and once ignited, it's nearly impossible to extinguish. What seemed like a minor fire on the surface quickly evolved into something much more serious, as the flames began to infiltrate the vast network of tunnels left by long-abandoned coal mines. At first, the fire was small and manageable. The local residents and officials didn't perceive the true danger of what was happening. The smoke that began seeping from cracks in the ground was dismissed as a minor nuisance, and the situation was largely ignored. However, beneath the surface, the fire was feeding on the rich coal deposits deep underground, and with every passing day, it grew stronger. The fire's real danger lay in its ability to spread unnoticed. Once the coal ignited, it created an underground furnace burning away at the coal seams, generating enough heat to continue spreading far beyond what anyone had anticipated. The flames were deep beneath the ground, so there was no visual cue of the fire's full extent, and people continued with their daily lives, unaware of the creeping disaster. As the fire spread through the maze of old mine shafts, it also began to affect the surface. The earth above the fire heated up, causing the ground to shift and crack. Gas and toxic fumes, including deadly carbon monoxide, began to seep into the air, making it increasingly hazardous to breathe. Yet, it wasn't just the deadly gases that posed a threat, it was the intense heat radiating from the ground. Temperatures reached dangerously high levels, even in the streets of Centralia. In the early years of the fire, the town's officials and residents tried to contain it. Firefighters and emergency workers dug trenches and attempted to cut off the fire's access to new coal seams. But with every effort to control it, the fire only spread further. The underground fire was proving impossible to contain and had no regard for human attempts at intervention. By the mid-1970s, it was clear that Centralia was fighting a losing battle. The fire continued to spread underground, and despite the state's efforts to control the blaze, there was no end in sight. It became evident that the fire was not just a temporary crisis. It was an unrelenting force that would burn for decades, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. What started as a small and seemingly inconsequential fire in a landfill had turned into one of the most devastating environmental disasters in American history. The people of Centralia were now facing a fire that would not only consume their town but also change the course of their lives forever. The underground fire had turned their town into a living nightmare, and the residents were left to grapple with the consequences of a tragedy that no one saw coming, as the underground fire in Centralia raged on, consuming the town from below. Many of the town's residents and officials were left unaware of the full scope of the disaster. While the fire itself was the most visible sign of destruction, there were hidden truths buried deep within the mine shafts that no one had anticipated. What had begun as a small and seemingly isolated incident soon revealed its far-reaching consequences. And the more people learned, the darker the truth became. The real issue wasn't just the fire itself, but the decades of neglect and poor management of the coal mines beneath Centralia. The town's coal mines had been operating for years before the fire started, and many of the mine shafts had been abandoned or left in disrepair. These tunnels and shafts, which had once served as vital infrastructure for the mining industry, were now filled with a dangerous combination of dry coal, oxygen, and stagnant air, perfect conditions for a catastrophic fire. What the public didn't know was that the mines beneath Centralia were far more extensive than anyone had realized. Over 45 miles of abandoned tunnels ran beneath the town, creating an intricate network of coal veins that the fire could easily travel through. As the fire spread, it didn't just burn through one small section of the mines, it had access to the entire network, meaning there was no way to contain it once it had started. What was even more terrifying was that many of these tunnels were unstable. Some already collapsed, while others were simply not well documented. The mines had been poorly maintained, and the maps showing their extent were incomplete at best. The lack of information on the mine shafts and their interconnectedness made it virtually impossible for authorities to predict the fire's path. And the residents of Centralia had no idea just how bad things had gotten until it was far too late. Furthermore, there was another critical issue: the dangerous gases that the fire produced. As the coal burned underground, it released toxic fumes such as carbon monoxide, methane, and sulfur dioxide gases that were odorless, invisible, and incredibly deadly. For years, the residents of Centralia continued to breathe in these fumes, not knowing that they were slowly poisoning themselves. The authorities were slow to respond to the health risks posed by these gases, and many residents only began to evacuate after experiencing symptoms like dizziness, nausea, and shortness of breath. But By the time the town was fully evacuated, the damage had already been done. The fire had consumed not just the coal veins, but the lives of those who had been living above it. The town that had once been home to thousands of people was now a toxic wasteland, with deadly gases seeping from cracks in the earth and flames still burning out of sight beneath the streets. The full scope of the fire's impact wasn't just about the visible destruction, it was about the unseen damage done to both the environment and the people who had called Centralia home. In retrospect, many argue that the signs were there all along. But because of the town's lack of resources and the government's slow response, the severity of the fire was downplayed for years. Officials didn't fully comprehend the vastness of the underground network of tunnels, nor did they understand how quickly the fire could spread through them. As the situation worsened, it became apparent that the damage was irreversible. The real tragedy of Centralia wasn't just the fire, it was the failure to act sooner, the refusal to confront the danger until it was too late. The secrets hidden within the mines are a reminder of the dangers that can lie beneath the surface, both literally and figuratively. The fire that burned for decades in Centralia wasn't just an accident, it was the result of years of neglect and mismanagement that ultimately led to an irreversible disaster. And what's even more haunting is that Centralia may not be the only town with such hidden dangers. How many other places could be sitting on similar ticking time bombs waiting to erupt? As the underground fire in Centralia spread uncontrollably, it became clear that the town was in danger of being lost forever. The air grew toxic. The ground beneath its residents' feet became unstable, and the very streets they had lived on for decades were being consumed by the fire beneath them. What had started as a small incident now appeared to be an apocalyptic disaster, and the residents of Centralia were forced to face the harsh reality that their lives were about to change forever. The process of evacuation began in the early 1980s, but it wasn't immediate. Many residents refused to leave their homes, believing that the fire was not as serious as it had been made out to be. There were plenty of people who still didn't fully understand the extent of the danger. After all, the fire was underground and out of sight. It wasn't something that they could see with their own eyes, and as humans often do, they tended to downplay the severity of the situation until it became undeniable. It wasn't until the ground began to shift and sink that the truth could no longer be ignored. The residents of Centralia started to notice large cracks forming in their streets and sidewalks. In so many areas, the ground began to sink in places, opening up fissures large enough to swallow vehicles whole. These visible signs of destruction were a harsh wake-up call to everyone still living in the town. But it was the carbon monoxide poisoning that really forced the issue. As the fire raged beneath the surface, it released dangerous gases into the air. These gases, particularly carbon monoxide, were odorless, colorless, and completely invisible. Residents who had been exposed to the gases began experiencing severe symptoms such as dizziness, nausea, and headaches. The situation had gone from bad to worse, and now it was clear that Centralia was no longer a place where people could live safely. In 1984, the government stepped in and began a more formal evacuation process, offering financial assistance to the residents who were willing to leave. It was a difficult decision for many families. After all, Centralia had been their home for generations. The idea of leaving everything behind, their homes, their businesses, their lives, was a painful one. But there was no other choice. The fire wasn't going to stop, and the town's infrastructure was rapidly deteriorating. For some, the evacuation came too late. Many of the residents who had waited too long to leave ended up suffering from the long-term effects of exposure to the toxic gases, and several people were hospitalized with severe cases of carbon monoxide poisoning. The town was no longer habitable, and despite the protests of many, the official decision to abandon Centralia was made. By the late 1980s, most of the residents had moved out, and the town was officially abandoned. What was once a bustling mining town now stood as a ghost town, with empty homes and streets that were slowly sinking into the earth. The fire that had started so innocently was now a permanent part of Centralia's landscape, continuing to burn beneath the surface with no end in sight. The evacuation was not just about relocating people. It was about saying goodbye to a piece of history. Centralia wasn't just a town. It was a community, a place where families had lived and worked for decades. The loss have. Centralia wasn't just the loss of buildings and homes, it was the loss of an entire way of life, a culture that had been tied to the land and the coal mines for generations. Today, As you look at the empty streets and abandoned buildings, it's hard not to wonder what could have been done differently. Could the town have been saved? Could the fire have been contained before it spread so far? The residents of Centralia didn't want to leave, but in the end, the fire made it impossible to stay. The story of Centralia's evacuation is one of sadness, despair, and lost dreams. It's a reminder of how a small mistake, left unchecked, can have devastating consequences. It's a story about the struggle between holding on to the past and facing the harsh reality of the future. And it's a story that continues to haunt the people who were forced to leave, as they now live with the memories of a town that no longer exists. Once the evacuation of Centralia began, it became clear that this was not just a temporary crisis. The underground fire, which had started as a small, contained incident, had already begun to reshape the town in ways that no one could have predicted. What began as a localized disaster had turned into something much larger, something that would change the town and the lives of its residents forever. The fire, still burning deep beneath the town's surface, spread through miles of old, abandoned mine tunnels. With every passing year, the fire only seemed to grow stronger and harder to contain. The situation worsened with every attempt to control it. The fire was no longer something that could be fought with traditional methods. What made it so insidious was that it was invisible, burning far below the surface, where no one could see it or put out the flames directly. The ground began to crack and shift, opening up dangerous gaps and dangerous voids. One of the most unsettling changes in Centralia was how the landscape began to literally sink as the fire burned. It consumed not only coal, but also the very foundation of the land itself. Areas of the town started to collapse, and entire blocks of houses and roads were swallowed into the earth. As the ground destabilized, many of the structures that were still standing became hazardous. Buildings, which were once the homes and businesses of the people who lived there, were left to deteriorate, abandoned, and consumed by the fire's unseen reach. With no way to stop the fire, Centralia became a permanent scar on the landscape. What was once a lively and thriving town was now reduced to a skeletal remnant of itself. The fire continued to burn beneath the surface, unrelenting and unpredictable, its damage invisible to the naked eye, but ever present. The town was slowly being destroyed from the inside out, with the underground fire doing what no natural disaster or war could do, reducing an entire community to nothing more than a memory. But the changes didn't just affect the land. The residents of Centralia were left with a profound sense of loss and helplessness. Families who had lived in the town for generations were forced to abandon the homes they had known their entire lives. For many, this wasn't just a physical loss, it was an emotional one. Centralia had been their home, their community, their way of life. And now, with the fire burning beneath them, they were left to watch as everything they knew was taken away. The fire didn't just alter the town, it altered the course of the lives of everyone who was affected by it. For many of the former residents, the evacuation wasn't just about leaving a town. It was about leaving behind their history, their culture, and the life they had built. It was a traumatic experience that has left deep scars on the people who were forced to leave. The lasting impact of the fire on Centralia is still felt today. Even though most of the town has been abandoned and the population has dwindled to just a handful of people, the fire still burns beneath the earth, a constant reminder of the destruction that occurred. Centralia's fate is sealed. It's a town that can never be rebuilt, and its residents will never return to reclaim what was lost. What happened in Centralia is more than just a tragedy, it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of ignoring the potential consequences of environmental hazards. The fire beneath Centralia has changed the town and its people forever, and the scars left behind will remain for generations to come. The town may be gone, but the lessons learned from this disaster will echo through time. As the underground fire continued to spread beneath Centralia, the town's residents were growing more desperate. The visible signs of destruction, cracks in the earth, toxic gas emissions, and the increasing temperature of the ground were impossible to ignore. Yet, despite these undeniable dangers, the government's response was slow, and for many, the inaction was baffling. Why did it take so long for the authorities to step in and address the fire that was slowly but surely consuming an entire town? In the early days, local officials were reluctant to acknowledge the full scale of the problem. The fire, after all, had started underground, out of sight, and often out of mind. There was no immediate dramatic explosion or fireball to grab attention, just the slow, smoldering spread of heat and gas beneath the surface. To many, it seemed like just another industrial fire in an old coal mine that could be controlled or contained with the right measures. It wasn't until the situation began to escalate that the authorities started to realize the true scope of the disaster. One of the most puzzling aspects of the delayed response was the lack of urgency from the state and federal governments. Centralia wasn't a major city, and it was located in a region known for its mining industry. The coal mines had been a major part of the town's economy for years, and there was a general reluctance to acknowledge that something as simple as a fire could cause such widespread devastation. But as the fire grew, so did the realization that this wasn't just a local problem, it was a matter that could impact the entire region. The government was slow to respond for several reasons. First, there was a lack of knowledge about the long-term dangers of underground fires. Coal fires, like the one burning beneath Centralia, were not well understood, and the idea that a fire could burn for decades without being extinguished was unfathomable to most at the time. Second, there was a bureaucratic inertia that delayed action. Local officials were overwhelmed by the scale of the situation and unsure of how to proceed. The state government, too, was slow to react, and it wasn't until the 1980s that the federal government became more involved. Even then, the response was less about preventing the disaster and more about managing the aftermath. By the time the federal government allocated funds to help with the evacuation and relocation of residents, much of the damage had already been done. The town of Centralia had already begun to collapse into the fire, and the fire itself had spread too far for anyone to stop it. The government's role shifted from prevention to damage control, and the residents were left to bear the brunt of the consequences. What's perhaps even more frustrating is that the government could have acted sooner. By the time the fire had spread significantly, there were already signs that Centralia's infrastructure was being severely affected. The coal fire wasn't a secret; it had been reported in the news for years. Yet, the response from local, state, and federal authorities was slow, leaving residents to deal with a situation that could have been mitigated with earlier intervention. The situation in Centralia is a prime example of how government response can often lag behind when it comes to environmental disasters. Had the authorities taken action sooner, perhaps the town could have been saved, or at the very least, the damage could have been lessened. But because the fire was underestimated and ignored for so long, it grew into a disaster of epic proportions. The lessons from Centralia are still relevant today. Disasters like these serve as a reminder that the government must act quickly and decisively when dealing with environmental threats. The failure to address the fire in its early stages ultimately led to the abandonment of an entire town, and it serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of inaction when it comes to environmental hazards. Decades have passed since the fire started beneath Centralia, but the underground fire still burns. This is no ordinary Blazitza fire that, despite the best efforts of local and federal authorities, has remained active for over 60 years. The mystery lies in how and why it has endured for so long, despite the countless attempts to extinguish it. Why is the fire still burning today, and what makes it so difficult to control? To understand why the Centralia fire is so unique, it's important to first recognize what it's burning. The fire isn't just consuming wood or surface coal, it's burning through miles of coal veins that stretch far beneath the town. Once coal is ignited, it burns for an incredibly long time. Unlike traditional fires that can be put out with water or foam, coal fires have access to vast, seemingly endless fuel sources deep underground. As long as there's coal to burn and oxygen to feed it, the fire will keep going. The underground network of coal mines in Centralia is vast and complex. The fire, which started in a small section of the abandoned mines, quickly spread through these tunnels, which were left unsealed and poorly maintained. As the fire traveled deeper and further, it encountered new veins of coal, feeding it with a constant supply of fuel. This makes the fire incredibly difficult to extinguish. When you manage to contain part of it, the fire simply moves to another section of the mine, where there's more coal to burn. In addition to the ample fuel, the fire is also insulated by the earth itself. The ground above it acts like a natural barrier, trapping the heat and preventing it from escaping. Traditional methods of fighting fires like dousing them with water or digging trenches to cut off the fuel are largely ineffective underground. The fire is sealed off beneath layers of soil and rock, which means it's incredibly hard to reach. The deeper the fire gets, the harder it becomes to put it out. And since the fire is now spread over such a wide area, There's simply no practical way to fight it in its entirety. One of the most baffling aspects of the fire is how it continues to burn, despite efforts to contain it. Firefighters and experts have tried for years to extinguish the blaze, but all their attempts have failed. At one point, there were efforts to flood the mines with water, but the fire simply moved to other areas of the mine where water couldn't reach. The mine's vast network of tunnels and seams allowed the fire to keep spreading and burning. Even more astonishing is the fact that the fire is still burning today, nearly 60 years after it started. In fact, some estimates suggest that the fire could continue to burn for another 100 years, if not longer. The sheer scale of the fire and the difficulty in accessing the underground mines make it almost impossible to stop. The coal continues to burn, and as long as it does, the fire will remain active. The fire's longevity has made it one of the most perplexing environmental disasters in modern history. But what does it mean for the future of Centralia and its residents? The fire has already caused irreversible damage to the land, the town, and the people who once called it home. For those who lived in Centralia, the ongoing fire represents not just the loss of their homes, but the loss of an entire community. While most of the residents have left, the fire still lingers as a symbol of destruction. The once thriving mining town has become a shadow of its former self, consumed by the very earth it was built on. The unrelenting fire serves as a harsh reminder of the power of nature and the dangers of environmental negligence. The people of Centralia didn't just lose their homes, they lost their history, their way of life, and their town. And while the fire continues to burn beneath the ground, the people of Centralia are left to wonder if the fire will ever truly be put out, or if it will remain a smoldering symbol of what was lost. What remains of Centralia today is not just a ghost town. It is a testament to the destructive power of an environmental disaster. The ruins of this once thriving town stand as a haunting reminder of what was lost and the price of neglect. Over the decades, the underground fire has consumed more than just Kalita has claimed homes, businesses, and the very identity of a community that once existed here. As Centralia continues to decay, its legacy remains embedded in the landscape. A city consumed by the fire that continues to burn beneath it. The town, now largely abandoned, has become a symbol of both devastation and resilience. Despite the tragic loss of life and the destruction of homes, there are those who still find beauty in the haunting ruins of Centralia. Abandoned streets, empty homes, and crumbling infrastructure stand in stark contrast to the bustling town that once was. Visitors come from around the world to see what remains, drawn by the eerie atmosphere and the sense of history that lingers in the air. The remains of Centralia are not just physical structures, but also a living memory of a community that was torn apart. Residents who once lived here remember the tight-knit neighborhoods, the shared experiences, and the sense of pride that came with calling Centralia home. But now, only the rubble and the fire beneath remain, and those who once lived here must carry the weight of their memories without the physical place to return to. One of the most striking features of Centralia's ruins is how nature has begun to reclaim the land. Despite the ongoing fire beneath the surface, plants and wildlife have started to return to the area. Trees and grasses now grow in the streets where cars once drove, and animals have started to wander through the once bustling town. The contrast between the human-made destruction and nature's gradual recovery is a poignant reminder of the passage of time and the resilience of life, even in the face of disaster. But there is also a certain sadness that pervades Centralia's ruins. What was once a place of life and activity is now a desolate wasteland. The abandoned homes, empty streets, and overgrown buildings speak to the town's lost potential. It's not just the buildings that are gone, it's the spirit of the people who once lived there. Centralia was a community, a place where families grew up, businesses flourished, and traditions were passed down. Now, it's just a memory, fading slowly with each passing year. The legacy of Centralia is also a lesson in the fragility of life and the dangers of ignoring environmental hazards. The fire beneath the town didn't just destroy buildings, it destroyed a way of life, a history, and a community. The town's rapid decline serves as a reminder of how quickly things can change, how a small spark can lead to a catastrophe that alters the course of history. Despite its destruction, Centralia's legacy lives on. The town is a powerful symbol of what happens when environmental risks are overlooked, and it continues to serve as a cautionary tale for future generations. The story of Centralia reminds us of the importance of proactive environmental management and the need to be vigilant in the face of potential disasters. It is a sobering reminder that, once lost, things cannot always be reclaimed. Visitors continue to explore the ruins, They are forced to confront the stark reality of Centralia's story. It is a place that once held the hopes and dreams of its people, but now stands as a testament to human error and the unyielding power of nature. The fire that still burns beneath the earth serves as both a literal and symbolic reminder of the destruction that occurred, and the remnants of the town will continue to stand as a haunting reminder of a lost community. Despite being abandoned and ravaged by fire, Centralia continues to live on in the stories and legends that surround it. Over the years, the town's eerie ruins have become a breeding ground for ghost stories, supernatural myths, and unanswered mysteries. The haunting presence of the underground fire, combined with the town's sudden disappearance, has made Centralia one of the most infamous places in America, inspiring countless tales of strange occurrences and unexplainable phenomena. The fire that still burns beneath Centralia has only added to the town's ghostly reputation. Locals and visitors alike claim to hear strange noises emanating from the earth, like distant rumbling or eerie whispers that seem to come from nowhere. Some say the ground itself seems alive, shifting and groaning as though it's trying to hold on to the town that once stood there. These unexplained sounds have given rise to countless ghost stories, with some suggesting that the spirits of the town's former residents still haunt the place. Unable to rest due to the tragic circumstances of their departure, one of the most well-known legends of Centralia is the story of the phantom truck. Visitors to the area have reported seeing a truck driving through the town, its headlights glowing faintly in the distance. But when they approach, the truck vanishes, disappearing as if it were never there. Some claim to hear the sound of the engine revving as the truck speeds down the empty roads, only to be met by silence when they turn the corner. The legend of the phantom truck has been passed down by those who have dared to venture into Centralia's ruins, and it has become an enduring part of the town's folklore. But it's not just the phantom truck that fuels the mystery of Centralia. Many visitors and explorers have reported feeling a sense of unease or dread when walking through the abandoned streets. There's something about the stillness, the emptiness, and the haunting silence of the town that seems to unsettle those who enter. It's as if the town itself is waiting for something or someone, perhaps to finally put it to rest. The ghostly nature of Centralia isn't just confined to supernatural legends. It's woven into the very fabric of the town, as though it's a place caught between the living and the dead. Some locals claim to have seen shadows moving in the windows of abandoned homes, or figures walking through the fog that rolls in from the hills. These ghostly apparitions are often described as resembling the former residents of Centralia, forever trapped in their hometown, unable to escape the flames that consumed their lives. The stories of these apparitions have become part of the lore surrounding the town, adding to the sense that Centralia is a place frozen in time, haunted by the past. The legend of Centralia is not just about ghostly sightings and strange occurrences, it's also about the lingering sense of loss and the unresolved questions surrounding the town's destruction. What happened to the people who lived there? Why did the government wait so long to act? And why did the town have to be abandoned so abruptly? These unanswered questions have fueled the mystery and intrigue surrounding Centralia, turning it into a modern-day legend that continues to captivate the imagination of those who hear its story. But what makes the legends of Centralia even more intriguing is the fact that they might be based in reality. The town's tragic history, combined with the ongoing fire that still burns beneath the surface, gives it a unique and eerie quality that few other places can match. Centralia is a town that should have been forgotten, but its ghostly presence lives on, not just in the physical ruins, but in the stories that continue to be told about it. After more than 60 years of burning, the future of Centralia remains uncertain. The town, once home to thousands of people, is now little more than a shell of its former self. The fire that started in the 1960s continues to burn beneath the earth, while the remnants of the town's streets and buildings stand as eerie monuments to a past long gone. But what remains of Centralia today? And what does the future hold for this haunting ghost town? Despite the evacuation and abandonment of Centralia, the fire beneath the town continues to smolder with no end in sight. In fact, experts believe that the fire could burn for another 100 years or more, given the size of the coal seams and the fire's ability to spread. The town itself may be gone, but the fire that caused its destruction will continue to leave its mark on the landscape for generations to come. Today, only a few residents remain in the area, living in the small part of Centralia that was not affected by the fire. The rest of the town is a desolate, dangerous place. Roads are cracked, buildings are crumbling, and toxic gas leaks from fissures in the earth Yet, despite the hazardous conditions, the ruins of Centralia continue to attract visitors, drawn by the town's tragic history and the mystery that surrounds it. People come to walk through the empty streets, take photos, and explore the ghostly remnants of a town that was once alive with activity. The continued presence of the fire raises important questions about the future of the region. While the town of Centralia itself is no longer viable, what will happen to the land surrounding it? Will the fire continue to spread, consuming more of the land, or will it eventually burn itself out? Can the region be rehabilitated, or will it remain a forgotten wasteland? These questions remain unanswered as the fire continues to burn, seemingly without end. Despite the ongoing fire, there are some signs of hope for the surrounding area. The government has considered redirecting resources to prevent the spread of the fire and to safeguard nearby communities from potential danger. There have also been talks about creating a memorial or a museum to preserve the history of Centralia and educate the public about the environmental disaster that took place. But for now, the future of the region remains uncertain, as the town of Centralia continues to exist only in the memories of those who once lived there. The story of Centralia is far from over. While the town may be gone, its legacy lives on. The town's tragic past, its ghostly ruins, and the fire that still burns beneath the ground serve as powerful reminders of the dangers of environmental neglect and the consequences of ignoring the risks posed by industrial activities. Centralia may have disappeared, but its story continues to captivate the world, drawing visitors from all over to witness the haunting remains of a city that once burned with life but now burns in memory as the fire continues to burn beneath the earth. It is impossible to predict what the future will hold for Centralia and the surrounding area. But one thing is certain, the story of Centralia will never be forgotten. It will remain a haunting reminder of the cost of neglect, the power of nature, and the fragility of the human-built world.